All right. What's going on, everyone? Brother Ron here. I wanted to give an update on this book I'm reading, Oprah Book Club, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Great book so far. It's almost everything that I hoped it would be. Well researched. The author is a journalist, educated, does a lot of analysis, and I really like her book so far. All right, so I'm going to give a quick summary of what I've read so far, and also talk about how important it is to kind of hear and understand her background. So this is her, Isabel Wilkerson. Again, she's a journalist. I wouldn't compare her as an author to Robin DiAngelo, who wrote White Fragility, and the more I read this book, Caste, the less I would recommend White Fragility. If you didn't know, White Fragility, the author, is a sociologist, PhD, right? And she's worked as a racial sensitivity officer, which is okay, but the main issue I had with that book was she didn't really focus on human nature, psychology. She focused a lot on, she had an idea and she ran away with it, and then she used her anecdotal evidence and examples from her own life, right, in order to prove her points. It's not so convincing, right? Especially when you consider how a person might cherry pick these, right? Which is why I want to hear more evidence. And so quickly about how I read this, I look at the audiobook for Caste and get it through Audible. I don't actually read it, I listen to it. It's 15 hours long, but the beauty of the audiobook is you can listen to it at a higher pace. So I read it at 125%, the normal speed. And I can do this when I'm in my car, when I'm watering plants, when I'm cleaning, when I'm doing laundry, when I'm at the gym, all right, and it frees up my eyes, right, my vision, or I can just relax, listen. And that's why, like, I'm not the type of person that wants to take a book and, curl up with this book, drink some wine in my bubble bath, right? That's not me. Actually, that sounds awful. And so I liked the audiobook, and so let's see where. And so far, it's been very good. And in terms of a recap, she's basically performing an analysis on America's social structure, right? Now, human nature, we have hierarchies, no doubt about it. It's visible everywhere we go, even though our country is founded on ideas of egalitarianism, treat everybody equal. But we know that's not necessarily true, right? We go to any company, people are not paid the same way. People don't have the same amount of power. Relationships, people don't have the same amount of power. Families, people don't have the same amount of power. But she's exploring this on the society level. And with that, she looks at our history, right, in terms of where white people were and black people. She compares it to the Indian caste system, which is almost synchronous with the Hindu idea, right? If you're not familiar, this is relevant to Buddhism as well. If you are a good person in your life, or you will, you have good karma, and so in the next life you'll be a higher level, right? So at the bottom are the untouchables, the Dalits, who will, clean shitters basically, traditionally, and at the highest are Brahmins, so they're the, religious figures, the elites, the people of God, I guess you could call them. And of course, if you are a bad person, right, that's the belief system, right? It's the same as heaven and hell for Christians, right? You do bad, well, you're gonna go to a bad place. In this case, you're reincarnated as a lower class, or even like a cockroach or something. And there's some problems with that, by the way. Namely that it doesn't really hold true because in that caste system, which Isabel Wilkerson's trying to discuss, you don't actually change caste. You stay in that caste your entire life. Your children will stay in that caste your entire life. If you try to marry someone of a higher caste, there's going to be people that object. I mean, literally, if you are a lower caste man and you try to marry a Brahmin lady, I don't know, the stars align or whatnot. I'm sure they're gonna, try to beat you up, or they're gonna do something to the girl to restore honor, depending on what kind of belief systems they have personally. But then there's finally the kind of social hierarchy in Nazi Germany. And if you're unfamiliar with Nazi Germany, how it happened was basically after World War One, Germany, they lost. And so all these countries were pissed off and they said, all right, Germany, you're going to pay us back. This is your fault. You pay us, right? I mean, our law system is the same way. You bump my car, you pay for the bumper. Okay? So Germany printed a whole lot of money in order to pay the debt. And you print a whole lot of money, you end up with hyperinflation. You have hyperinflation, people's dollars their life savings become worthless. People's life savings become worthless. They have economic issues and they lose hope for the future. When that happens, people get desperate. People get desperate, despondent. What do? Human nature is, what do? They blame. Some might reflect on their lives and how they could have did differently. They might vote differently. Most people are going to blame someone. All right, and we're seeing it now as well. Modern day America, 2020, coronavirus. Okay, they're blaming someone. They're blaming Trump. They're blaming China. They're blaming their state governors. Looting, Black Lives Matter. They're blaming anarchists. They're blaming the police. They're blaming white supremacists. All right, that's just human nature when people are desperate and despondent. And of course, it's a lot easier to blame a face. This is why when we have the tornadoes in the southeast part of America, you don't hear them protesting a lot. You don't hear them being angry at people. And why is that? Because there's no face to blame. You can't blame Mother Nature. You can. But more than likely, there's no one to blame. Maybe you can blame FEMA for the response, but ultimately, you have to accept it. But when there's a face to it, that's when you can get upset. That's when you can start getting the tar and the feather and the pitchforks and the torches. And the target there were Jews. Historically, Jews are a minority all over Europe, and especially in Germany, I think probably because of their, it's either the culture or maybe they're penny pinching folks. I say that, hey, easy. I say that as an ethnically Chinese person who prides myself on saving money. All right. Or it could be, I heard Ashkenazi Jews have, on average, the highest IQ. I don't know. But they were really good with money. They were successful business owners, more successful than the local Germans. And this is not right or wrong. This is just human nature. And so you have all these people upset. They want to blame someone. It's easy to blame the minority as a scapegoat, the successful minority. If Jews were poor and on welfare, maybe not as much, but they're successful. And that's why they eventually relegated Jews to a second-class citizenship. They put that yellow star on them, and there was mistreatment of them without punishment, but to Germans, as well as, the eventual, camps. And so all that, it highlights a common trend, and that's what her whole book is about. It's analyzing the parallels between all three situations, and let's get into it. All right. And so the first part, she starts talking about modern day America and why people were, well, why a lot of white supremacists were happy voting for Trump. And she wants to equate this to the feeling that some white folks are feeling that they're losing something, that they may be losing their place in society. And that's the gravest threat for everybody, by the way. If you're on the bottom rung, you only have something to gain, but if you are somehow in a higher level, you have something to lose. And that's where you start hearing terms like, keep the immigrants out, and, um, white threat, or white genocide, or, those are kind of far right ideas. I wouldn't say it's a white person thing, but that's her proposal. That's her theory, right? I'm not going to say it's fact, because I already see a lot of holes with that. Personally, I know that's what she wants to push, that people voted for Trump because that'll maintain their status in society, that their feeling is threatened. But you cannot account for so many voters by just saying, you're a white supremacist and you're afraid of losing out to other minorities or something. That also doesn't explain, why there's so many white voters in the Democratic Party. It doesn't explain black voters or other minority voters voting for Trump. But I want to just entertain her idea, because she's going somewhere, and then she draws it from history, where just by being on a higher level, social status than black people have a certain power, right? They can say, do this, do that, and just as citizens, right? As a citizen, not as a official or anything. And also it means that they can't talk back to you. All right. And so at this point, I want to bring out this idea, a very solid idea she has throughout the book, and that is class versus caste. And I already talked about caste, which is the name of the book, right? And it's that, it's similar idea, except caste you cannot get rid of. Class you can change. And if you need an example, in the book My Fair Lady, it happened in Britain, and the setting is there's a guy, he is trying to, I don't know, change this kind of ghetto girl. She speaks with a Cockney accent, right? It's the kind of the weird, the poor British accent, me think you buy me some I call or something, right? Terrible impression. But right, it's not the posh type of British accent you would hear from the Queen or royalty. And so he goes out and he buys a nice dress for her, dresses her up, teaches her how to speak like a English lady, and then everybody buys into it, right? So she's changing her class simply by changing how she speaks and her appearance. With caste, you cannot change that. And that goes back to what I was mentioning about the caste system. If you believe in reincarnation, and that your place on the system is based on your doings, then how is it possible that a person's caste is placed onto their children? That makes no sense. And so, and also it also means if you're from a higher caste, how come it's possible that if you're doing bad things, you aren't removed from your caste and sent to a lower one in your lifetime, or even to your children? That makes no sense either. And so that's the problem with caste. It has a good idea, same with heaven and hell, but eventually it's perversed by people, and ultimately comes down to, if you're in a higher caste, you don't want to give up that privilege. All right, life is good for you. You don't want to give that up, no matter what, no matter how rotten you are. And so that's class versus caste. So they're saying, she's saying, black people in America, they cannot change the color of their skin. And I've heard this from my black friend too. But if you're a white person, say you're a ghetto white person, you could put on a suit, change your ghetto accent, maybe a drawl you have, and then you can be perceived differently. And you've also seen this in China, where they have these things called white monkeys, where basically you just have to dress up, and then people in companies will hire you and bring you to parties, because somehow as a foreigner there's a perception, a white foreigner, right? There's a perception that you are, let's see if I can Google that term, you are more prestigious, or you bring clout to the company. Whoops. White monkey China. Is that the right term? Oh yeah. Rent a former industry. Right, even Vice did it. Right, so that's the idea of class versus caste. Okay. Alright, so let's talk about that. She talks a lot about Jim Crow laws and eras, and how, well, there's a lot of stories she brings up from the past which highlights the injustices that higher class folks have done against lower class folks. And it also includes this idea of keeping things separate. So, of course, this is actually true across almost every second class citizen, is the need to protect your women, right? And so this not only happened with black folk in America's past, but also Italian, German immigrants, and Japanese immigrants, Chinese immigrants, and they're called anti-miscegenation. And it's basically, if you're this lower caste male, don't you dare think about having sex with, marrying, a normal white girl, right? And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think the first is that it makes men of that class very insecure. All right, if a lower class man who is supposedly below you gets with a woman that you can't get with, I think that triggers something in men. We have egos. Another thing is that it also is I think it's a fear, possibly a fear amongst human beings of their women being taken away by all these foreign men, and that's where it comes into law, anti-miscegenation. I don't know if you know, but the stereotypes of black people and Chinese people in the past has been of violent rapists who are going to soil the innocence of white women in America. I'm serious. You might think of the modern, say, Chinese stereotype, violin and coronavirus and, I don't know, maybe eating a cat. But it's just a changing of the times. Passing of the torch to some other bullshit stereotype. And so that's how it comes out. Actually, there's a great example she throws out. It was of a black man was marrying a white woman, so they were actually planning, because of the anti-miscegenation laws, they were actually planning to jail him. But they found out she was Sicilian, right? So that's that island south of Italy, which is not considered white. And so then they said, okay, oh, you're good, man. We don't want that trashy Sicilian woman. All right. And that kind of highlights this kind of the idea where, race is a social construct. And they're technically, not white, you're not white, and etc. And okay. So there's that section. Oh, they brought out Jane. Was it Jane? I forgot her name. She did the brown eyes, blue eyes experiment to show how a generally a random trait, and then making people privileged or non-privileged based on that, creates resentment in people who are in the lower system. I mean, if you're on the top, you're not going to complain as much because I mean, how does it affect you poorly? If you're on the bottom, there's a lot of resentment to be had. And then now suddenly you're having all this resentment, and people are saying, why are you being so resentful? But again, that's our human nature. And so that's where I'm at so far in the book. It's really good. It's really good. I highly recommend it. It's well written. She's a journalist, and I really like her thinking. I think she does a good job. I don't 100% agree with everything she has to say. I think that there are events in our society that can't just be explained by, you know, white people trying to keep black people down and in their place. I'm sure there's instances of that, but there are too many instances, events and happening in our society, and too many people that just were never brought up into that system, indoctrinated, right? I mean, I wasn't, and most people in Hawaii, we just don't understand that because there are barely any black people, and white people, there are wealthy white people there, but most of the homeless are white too. And there's also a lot of wealthy, I guess, other folks who aren't white. And so it doesn't really make sense to us. It's, and still, I have to learn in order to have that make sense to me. So the main thing is, I would say, just, it's in our history, and it can definitely, history will always influence our modern day, and it has a lot of truth in terms of how events today are perceived with Black Lives Matter and the voting, and why there's a lot of white supremacists that do support Donald Trump. But we can never explain all those events through this lens of, you know, there's a caste system in America. So I want to keep that in mind, right? There are black people that vote for Trump. There are conservatives that might vote for Trump mainly because maybe they don't agree with Democrats. There are black people committing crimes, and they may be shot by a white person, but that does not mean it's a caste system and they're rounding up slaves or something. It's an independent event. If you don't believe me, just look up Hakeem Littleton. The guy wasn't being arrested, his friend was, and then he took out his gun, opened fire on police officers. Good thing he's a bad shot, but he himself had a criminal history, and he missed. The police officer that was not being fired on opened fire on him because they were only about 10-15 feet away from the guy. And of course, what happened? Protests against police brutality and saying this is America, KKK America, when in fact it was completely independent of that. And so I would say it's important to understand this book, the idea that it shares, but also understand that it cannot explain every single white person, black person event in America. Okay. All right. So I can't wait to talk more about this book when I finish it. In the meantime, take care and have a good one.